Okay, let's begin. So today we're talking about the chapter from Wesen der Sprache, I think it is, yeah. And in the English that is the nature of language. And we've said a lot already about several aspects that have to do with this topic, because it also features in the Sprache, this thing that we talked about last time, and then in the dialogue that opens the book. Same themes, very much the same themes, but here we get, so this is actually a set of 3 lectures that Heidegger gave, and this is what is part of this, at the University of Freiburg there was this year of where people came to talk about language from all sorts of perspectives. I think he mentioned from Weizsäcker, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, who was a physicist and wrote cybernetic. Had a cybernetic approach to language, and Weizsäcker actually is an interesting person from a philosophical point of view. He knew Heidegger very well, although he was purely a philosopher of physics. He was a scientist, but he knew Heidegger quite well. So, okay, that's not so important. What is important is that in these 3 lectures we get a number of things that we haven't seen yet when we look at this leading question or a leading task of the book and also of our seminar, to get to make eine Erfahrung zu machen, to have an experience with language. That's the real point that Heidegger tries to talk about here. And actually, I don't know if you agree, but with this text and based on the discussions that we've had so far, I think we're beginning to see what this experience with language actually is. That was my impression, but we'll see how far we get as we discuss it. So I did the same thing as last time. I made a little list of things that might be interesting for us to talk about. And we can see how we do. I'll write them down. And you can add stuff if you feel that we should say more. There is this theme of method, which I think is very important here, and then the alternative way or Weg. And I think there is the theme which we talked about already and which becomes clear here, of the relation between dichten und denken, richten und henken. Then we have this thing about the being of language, the language of being. And Heidegger uses the word Wesen there, das Wesen der Sprache, und Sprache des Wesens. Then there is the concept of the Nähe, the near, or nearness. Then we have, and in relation to that, we have the Gegend, what is called in the, I think in the English translation is called the region. Yeah? Gegend, and related to that, gegeneinander über. Or also the gegenüber, which is a word that, incidentally, I said that before, that Buber also uses for the I-thou relation. Yeah? It's a relation of encounter, of over against. And it's the Gegend that opens up the region of the region that opens up the possibility of an over against. Yeah? So then we have sagen, which we talked about last time as well, but it comes back here. And then finally we have, and I do think it's very important that we talk about that, is death. So the text ends with an essential connection that Heidegger indicates. He says it can only indicate it between language, or language as saying, sagen, and death. And I would like to try if we can get to the point where we understand by the end of the seminar what the connection is between language and death. Yeah, I don't know, I thought it was, he mystifies it, but I thought it wasn't that hard, but we'll see. So, is it okay if we try to discuss these topics and then see if we can distill a picture on the basis of that, of what this text is doing, and try to reflect on what we think about that. So let's start with method. I mentioned, yeah, and there is also, of course, I mean, you know, there is this poem by Stefan George, das Wort, kein Ding sein, wo das Wort gebricht, nothing may be, or where word breaks off, no thing may be. There is a recent book on translation I've quoted, which references this poem as well. It's called Of Norms and Norms. So we get the grauwe norm in this poem. I think it is probably best if we don't spend too much time on Heidegger's reading of the George poem. It will come up when we talk about kein Sein, wo das Wort gebricht, when we talk about dichten wie denken. That is actually, I want to tell you this, that is a very nice book, but it's written in Dutch. It's very old, about Heidegger, one of the first studies of Heidegger, and by Sam Eisseling, who was a professor in Leuven for a large part of his life. And it's called Denken en Danken, Geven en Zijn. Thinking and thanking, giving and being. Denken en danken, geben en zijn, I could also say. I think that if you keep that in mind as an indication of the fourfold, then you can't go far off. Denken, danken, so they belong together. Denken and zijn belong together, and danken and geven, thanking and giving belong to each other. And sein is for Heidegger that which es gibt, that which gives. And our response to it is a thanking. But we can also think it. So thinking and thanking belong together, and giving and being belong together. But they also, in the zeugma, as it were, belong together as thanking and giving as a pair, and thinking and being as a pair. And there is a fundamental ontological difference between those two pairs. But they are verschränkt, they are yoked together. So I think that that title sort of sums up quite a lot, actually, of what Heidegger is about. Okay, so we'll get to a kind of insight later on. Let's start with method. What is the concept of method? Well, what does Heidegger have to say about method? What did you make of that? If anyone's in the same on page 168, or 168 in the critical edition. Die wertvollsten Einsichten werden am spätesten gefunden, aber die wertvollsten Einsichten sind die Methoden. The most valuable insights are found at the end, but these are the methods. Why was that?
I don't actually have the text. I just came.
That's fine, don't worry about it. That's fine. I don't have an extra. I can put it on here.
I just read a comment at the time and read it before and ask us.
You can read whatever you would like. If you would. You can stay if you want to. There's no problem.
Send me info on what you're going to discuss.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's okay. Because we'll read the whole book, but we set a chapter for next time. I think it's going to be the thing of words. So, method. What does that mean? The most important things are found at the end. It's on page 74 in the English edition. The most valuable insights are gained last of all, but the most valuable insights are the methods. It's a really important point. I already mentioned to you that method is way. Yeah? So the methodos is going over a way, following a way. But it seems that Heidegger tries to contrast something. Yeah? Method holds all the coercive power of knowledge. Das Thema gehört in die Methode. The theme is a part of the method, he says on page 74. What is it?
Well, how I understand it, because basically at the beginning of this das Wesen der Sprache, he first contrasts that what does it mean to experience, so erfahren. So what does it mean to experience? And he basically first read the word very literally. So the experience, like fahren, so it's fast drive to go. It's basically you're on the way. Exactly. And he understands this erfahren as a way to obtain knowledge. But it's not just the knowledge, because somewhere in the passage he contrasts that kenntnis is not the same as erfahren. So I think both in English is translated as knowledge, right? So experience, so erfahren is experience, but kenntnis is knowledge. But this kenntnis is not wissen. So the knowledge that you already have about something, for example, water is drinkable, and some other, like oil, the oil is not drinkable, it's something that you already have. So wissen is to know. And I think for him it's basically what is important with method is method constitutes a way to obtain knowledge. Yeah. So it's basically a way that guides you to somewhere where you're supposed to have an understanding of something. But that way of knowing when you're on the way itself is also a method or way to acquire knowledge. So I think that is the reason why he quote Nietzsche, but also somewhere he talk about calculation.
Yeah, exactly.
He also mentions that the earlier passage I wrote about the question, the questioning after technology, where he criticizes I think probably the overestimation of calculation, that when you calculate too much, or the only way to know is calculation, then you rely on the way to know. That is lack experience. So this kind of way to know is only the thing that you want to know does not talk to you itself, like how he understands language. Not only we use language, but in the process that we use language, language should also talk to ourselves. So this is basically how he says that we meet together somewhere in the process, how we understand experience.
Yeah, that's how, okay, yeah, right. There are almost two notions of experience. There is erfahrung in the sense of mathematical, scientific experience, empirical investigation, see what happens when you follow a path. And there is erfahrung in the sense of widerfahren, stuff happening to you. So, and that has this gegenüber in itself, this over against and something coming to you. Language also is a good example of that. Widerfahrnis instead of erfahrung. In English we have that word in wayfarer or ferry. So the word fare and fahren, there's a cognate root in English for that. And it is to go out of yourself into somewhere and just to find something. So what does it mean to say das Thema gehört in die Methode? And because then he goes on, anders als im wissenschaftlichen Vorstellen verhält es sich im Denken. Hier gibt es weder die Methode noch das Thema. But in thinking, the situation is different from that of scientific representation. In thinking, there is neither method nor theme.
It's not systematized, isn't it? So a system of thought, so method is a systematic inquiry of any free idea or any free impulse. To me, I mean, that's why the last thing we learn after an inquiry is the method we applied, and this is the new insight that we gain for the next inquiry we make, and we find a new method in the new inquiry we made. So I think that each system we use to analyze a thought produces a new method, in essence, or uses some sort of
produces a new method and produces maybe also a new theme or a new object. Maybe scientific representation, wissenschaftliches Vorstellen, creates its object, as it were, creates its object. So this is a systematic way of doing things, but what appears in that perspective, like the calculating perspective, is only what can be calculated. What appears as an object of physical investigation are only physical objects. When the world, when our thinking becomes calculation, computation, or datafication, it's interesting Heideggerian reading of the word data. Because that's not quite what he means by giving, but as gibt. But of course the word datum is dare, is the same root, it's also giving. The data, or the world as it appears to us when we look at it through representing it through scientific method, that world is tied to the method.
Is it only scientific, the method? Because I always think that Heidegger is so obsessed with poems exactly because in his inquiry about language, the form of a poem is a method that fascinates him so much. But this is the first section that we said we're gonna. But it's very interesting at some point that he exclaims this: why all these artful explications, he says, about the poem? Which is a bit strange because it's a poem, so it's art. So why the art in the art? Because this is the method of
It's
of
better
the poetry.
yeah.
Otherwise it would be prose, otherwise it would be philosophy or history or something else.
Yeah.
So I think that method is not strictly scientific in this instance, it's form, any form.
What I refuse about. So it's quite clear by now that Heidegger tries to say there are two things, and they've got nothing to do with each other. Or, yeah, they have something to do with each other. There's method, ways of investigating, of obtaining knowledge by a kind of experience, and then there is thinking, which is experience in this emphatic ontological sense, and that's, for example, what we do in the poem, or when we try to think what a poem means, rather than analyze and interpret it, but we're thinking in the light of the poem, as he does with the Georg poem. Then something else happens, and he's quite clear about that. He says it's not method. There's neither method nor theme, but rather the region, so-called because it gives its real and free rein to what thinking is given to think. Hier gibt es weder die Methode noch das Thema, sondern die Gegend, die so heißt, weil sie das gegnet, frei gibt, was es für das Denken zu denken gibt. You're laughing. And you thought your meeting was bad.
Well, we could have planned, yeah.
Why this giggle? What triggered it?
Well, I mean,
it's a form of literary writing he does, isn't he? But what puts me off is that it is all closed in this idea that it's also deeply meaningful, whereas he is just playing with words to some extent. I mean, I'm quite allergic to his style.
verbose, it's very verbose, isn't it?
It's very verbose, yes, and but it's also playful, and that's nice. But he is so full of himself.
We've covered that.
Yeah, we spent a long time talking about that. But it's an important point. Is there another way to say this? Is it just a matter of taste that we say, "Oh, I don't like it," or is there a substantial point here that won't go away, and that we actually, maybe not in these words, but that we do have to think about? We can make one extra step if we go back to Nietzsche, to the remark that he quotes from Nietzsche. Die wertvollsten Einsichten werden am spätesten gefunden, aber die wertvollsten Einsichten sind die Methode. He doesn't really say a lot about it, how he understands this. But of course we know that Heidegger sees Nietzsche as the kind of final point of metaphysics, where metaphysics becomes generalized will to power, which he thinks is already there in Plato. Yeah,
I just want to say, so you're talking about method, and it's actually not just under his Nietzsche quote. There is this sentence: "In the method lies the violence of knowing."
Yeah.
So, what I think is, for example, in scientific methods, for example, that everything can be measured, can be calculated. It is, in today's term, it is way of objectification. So you have somehow, based on some criterion, objectify a thing. For example, the painting that can be objectified into what kind of pen have you used, or which color, or how old is the painting. So this is a way to objectify it. But in choosing your method, it also determines what do you see or what can you know. So if you choose the method of, let's say, how old is the painting, then probably the only knowledge that you can acquire from the painting is how old it is, but nothing else. I think what he here tries to say is that, of course, everything can, in a sense, to some extent, be objectified, but that is not the only way to know about something. So another possibility, especially in how he understands artwork or how he understands language, is basically they can also speak to us. And then I'm actually thinking about etymology. So you have a word and you trace the word back to the root, or in Latin or in Greek, and you try to understand what the word originally means and how the meaning changes. So this is, for example, probably a way to not to objectify this word, but to give the word a platform where he can, to some extent, speak for himself. Like for example, we say prejudice, and prejudice probably have something to do with prejudgment. So prejudice has this, what it means, and also the other day when we're talking about Bloch, we talk about Ursprung. So Ursprung is already always translated into English original, but they are basically two quite different meanings. But it's only translated into original because there is no other word that can take the meaning of Ursprung in German and then translatable to English. So I think probably what it means is that the violence of knowledge is not necessarily bad or negative, but it's like this violence, this power is a way to review what is knowable or what can be known about something, whether this thing is considered as a subject that can speak for himself, or this thing is considered as an object that can only be known through a third party, a third eye from outside.
From outside of method.
Yeah, if it is an object, if it is objectifiable, so then that means it cannot speak for himself or herself.
That's right, exactly, yeah. I think that's very well put, yeah. That's exactly it, yeah. In the sciences, not only is the theme drafted, called up by the method, wird das Thema nicht nur durch die Methode gestellt, sondern es wird zugleich in die Methode hineingestellt. It is also set up within the method and remains within the framework of the method, subordinated to it, und bleibt in ihr untergestellt. Das rasende Rennen, the furious pace at which the sciences are swept along today, das heute die Wissenschaft fortreist, sie wissen selber nicht wohin, they don't know whither themselves, comes from the speed-up drive of method with all its potentialities. The speed-up that is more and more left to the mercy of technology. Method holds all the coercive power about the wissens of knowledge. So exactly, something is reduced, a thing. So you could say for science there are no things, and of course that's also the way science goes. Scientific mind functionalizes the whole structure of the real. So the thing evaporates in scientific research, and whereas this other way of thinking is the thinking predominantly of the thing. The thing is precisely that which speaks to us.
I think you're using a very reductive way of defining scientific research. Because if you look at something like quantum theory, it's not at all limited. I mean, it uses equal methods of erfahren, whatever Heidegger meant. I mean, you can't separate scientific and...
but no, that's the question.
The thing is, I think in his time, I'm not sure in his time there is anything like quantum theory.
Oh yeah. No.
Because he
there was, Phil Weizsäcker was one of the leading quantum theorists.
Because the thing is, I think it depends how science was understood, but dominantly understood in his time. I think it's probably, how in the 19th century, all the development that of biology, I think that is probably like how developed in Enlightenment, and I think that notion.
No, I didn't think historically, so you're right.
He by the way, he mentions quantum physics.
Yes.
He says that it's measurement. Right? That's a whole section on measurement.
That I think whatever good Heidegger might have done, this sort of the hermeneutical questioning of how you approach things probably has now been taken on by science as well.
But sir, maybe
Right now, yes, but I think at that point in time, Heidegger was preoccupied because of the power of science. We are celebrating or commemorating the 100th year of the armistice and the end of the First World War. The First World War was actually the first war where that was conducted scientifically, where science was at the service of murder, in fact, and Heidegger knew that very well. And I think that most of this, perhaps afterwards, has been retaken. I don't know why, but I keep rereading Heidegger via the post-Heideggerians, but Truth and Method in government.
I've just looked
Looks into
yes,
these
exactly.
in depth, I think, you know. And he was sitting there.
he was in the audience.
And listening to the teacher, what he was talking about, while many years later, in fact, Gadamer was 60 when he published Truth and Method, so it was quite old. He thought and rethought a lot about it. You know, here there is a lot of technique, the way that the science has taken the thing, you know, TST, that's it. This is what it is, in fact. So it's an object, and I use it as an object. You know. Heidegger here is challenging science, okay, and saying, how much am I able, like you were saying, sorry, I don't know your name, but like you were saying, how can I listen to this object? To that, I think the word of language put together with the thing, my ability to listen to that.
And it's very important remark about the truth and method and hermeneutics. Remember that in the dialogue that we started with, he criticizes his use or his attachment to the term hermeneutics, and he says, oh, it was like a youthful sin, and don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. Why is that? Because so what he says here is not just, we realize that the way we approach something does something to what we experience, no, not at all. He says that is the highest discovery that metaphysics makes at the end, that how the world appears has to do with how you look at it. Kant, as it were, and metaphysical thinking discovers at its end with Nietzsche that is what it does. But precisely because metaphysics has done that, we, or I, Heidegger, can go one step deeper. And I can help us to think what gives rise to this attitude in which how you approach something and how it appears to you are together. And then I can show that, that's what he claims, I think. Then I can show that there are many methods, or there are many Žižek, there are many ways in which the world might appear to one. But that is on the basis of something else, which makes that possible in the first place. And that is no longer something where this codependency of subject and object reigns. That is where language speaks to us, or where language speaks and we then speak in return. And that's what we have to start to understand. That's what he means by Nähe, what he means by Gegend, Gegenüber. So it is the root of all these hermeneutical frames. But it's not that we discover that our relation to the world is caught up in a hermeneutical horizon. That, of course, you could say that is a big claim, and you might also disagree with it, because you might say, indeed, the sciences have become very much aware of this. And how do you? That was your question, Artemis. How is that? How is poetry then not a method? How is it not a method? We could say the poem is also a method. Yeah.
I just have a comment. I like the slightly left field comparison. I'm just reading about Convenor, like an introduction to And he is like obviously like set out a method for science and kind of also set out like three worlds, the subjective world, the material world, and world three, which is like the built world. An example would be like a beehive, but also abstractions and culture and stuff. So something you create but then study again. And that just I think that kind of shows quite well what the object of science is and the theme really, like the method kind of constitutes the object and then you're just working on that.
Yeah.
But I think science kind of think Heidegger makes perfect sense, you know, in saying that science only does that, it just works on metal, like a beehive, you know, creates them.
Yeah.
But outside of it, I think what Duncan might do is like a whole different landscape. And what's also interesting is that Popper like kind of set up falsificationism, so you come up with a hypothesis and then see if it's falsified. But something quite interesting as well is that he kind of admits that you can't reach hypotheses with the scientific method. And his kind of cop-out was that you need sort of intellectual love or Einfühlung to even get that intuition in the first place.
Exactly, yes.
So it's just quite different, but it seems to kind of fit in a way.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Yes, absolutely. I think that's very important. That Popper wasn't blind to these things, but he just calls it inspiration or creativity, or whereas Heidegger doesn't want to have anything to do with those words because they are metaphysical and they commit you already to a whole kind of onto constellation. But that's very I think that is very true, and as time goes by, we can see these parallels a lot clearer. So it only reinforces the point that if we go with Heidegger, we have to see what sense it makes to say that this Einfühlung and then falsification, in proper language, that they are two radically distinct things. And that you need the first one to even have the second one. And that the second, he says that science cannot talk about it. So there's no way, where he says that now? Science cannot talk about it. Wir sprechen und sprechen von der Sprache. But science can never speak of language in this way. And this way is then literally the way. That's Weg. He uses this old word. How to pronounce it as Wegen. And there he also he also points to where is it? To the on page 187 in the German. 186, 187. He then links this also to this idea of the Tao. He says, there you have, that's interesting. There he's almost saying, oh yeah, the Chinese got there 2,500 years before me.
He finally admitted that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It took him a while, but...
Yeah. This page 92 on in 1992.
Yeah.
To the modern mind, whose ideas are about everything are punched out in the die presses of technical scientific calculation, the object of knowledge is part of the method. That's what we've now seen. Yeah? Ultimately, indeed, falsification. And method follows what is in fact the utmost corruption and degeneration of a way. Yeah. For reflective thinking, on the contrary, the way belongs in what we here call the country or region, because on a way goes, So another way to understand this is with the word perspective. So you can never use the word perspective when you talk about what is here, this science thing. Because a perspective is a view through something. A view on something, we use it, but it's perspicace, it's to look through. It's a view through something. Through what? It doesn't talk about what you're looking through. It just is it's an unreflective word, right? So Heidegger tries to replace this by Gegend and Weg. A way leads through a region. And he was a country boy, and if you've been in country, then you know that I always think the big difference between the country and the city is that there's nowhere to walk in the country. You know, there are no streets, so you always have to rely on a path that is there, but then you see a whole field, and unless you're sort of barged through the field, you can have a real sense in the countryside that it doesn't disclose itself as much as a city does. And I think that has to do with the absence of streets. Whereas, as long as you have a path, it's okay, and Heidegger talks about the Feldweg, the country path, I think it's translated, where you walk through the Gegend and then you see being on both sides. Yeah? You see das Anwesen, she's laughing. You see das Anwesen on both sides. And then the way the Feldweg always is a circle. It comes back where it starts. It doesn't lead anywhere, or it's also ein Holzweg. So Holzweg is a way that foresters use to go into the forest to cut trees, and the road, the way, just indicates how far they got, and it stops where they're just at that point happening to be cutting down trees. So it doesn't go anywhere except it goes its own way. He talks about it in the dialogue as well, where he says where the Japanese says sometimes in philosophy or in thinking you have to go back. You have to go back on the way to see where you came from, and then it turns out to be different than what you thought, and then you have to make the same movement again. Then he says, "Oh, I'm surprised that you understand that you have such a deep insight into the nature of thinking." So there you see the same thing. Going on a way is in that sense different from the way of method, which is going from A to B. And this is not going from A to B, this is going through a region so that it may appeal to you. Yeah. And now the claim is that this is, then he says that is like Tao. That's what Lao Tzu means when he talks about the key word in Lao Tzu's poetic thinking is Tao, which properly speaking means way. But because we are prone to think of way superficially as a stretch connecting two places, our way has all too rashly been considered unfit to name what Tao says. Tao is then translated as reason, mind, with its own meaning logos. Yet Tao could be the way that gives all ways. And here we have a key phrase, the way that gives all ways. Indes könnte der Tao der alles bewegende van pronouncement, I with an umlaut, bewegende Weg sein. Dasjenige, woraus wir erst zu denken vermögen, was Vernunft, Geist, Sinn, Logos eigentlich, das heißt, was ich aus dem eigenen Wesen her sagen möchte. And this way hides itself. This way, you know, it has to hide itself because it is what gives beings into unconcealment. So that seems to be how method and way. I don't want to. We have to be careful not to make the mistake of being methodical about this. You know, if we're trying to be too methodical about it, then we put Heidegger in the straitjacket that he's trying to get us to see. Yeah? But there seems to be a dualism between method and way that we can.
Should we write a poem?
Yeah, we should actually.
In verse. Speaking verse from now on.
Yeah, we can all write one sentence.
Without seeing the previous one.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good question because it leads us to our second point, dichten und denken. So what is then the relation between dichten and denken? You might, Heidegger does suggest this, you might of course at first say, okay, method, that's thinking, you know, because thinking tries to be rational, reasonable. So as when we're in the world of method, we're thinking. When we're in the world of the way, then we then dichten. Poetry is the if you want to be really bad, you could say poetry is the method, but you wouldn't have to say poetry is the way. And we talked about so he mentioned in the conversation he mentioned the meaning of poetry, didn't he? Dichten. Charis is called. He comes to the Japanese, page 46. The Japanese comes to the word grace. He says there's something graciousness about meaning or about language. That's kind of the grace, it captures the grace of the world. And then he says, Charis, Heidegger says, Charis is here called tiktusa, that which brings forward and forth, or poiesis in Greek as making. Our German word dichton, says the same. Sophocles' lines portend to us that graciousness is itself poetical, it's itself what really makes poetry, the welling up of the message of the twofolds unconcealment. You know. So dichten is a form of making, just poetry is a form of poiesis, making, but not making in the sense of technique, not making in the sense of an art, of a producere, the producing of a thing, but it is a making in the sense of putting together so that the graciousness, the grace of the world, or the shine in which the things appear, come to us, may become visible. And that you would say, well, that is precisely what the way is about. That is what so what is then the difference between thinking and, or what is the relation between poetry and thinking? Yeah. Or how do they belong together? Because it's not the case that thinking is method. Okay? So it's on page 188 and 179. Yeah, 168. Nee. He gives a very clear indication. Yeah, page 184. Wie verhält es sich nun mit der Nachbarschaft von Dichten und Denken? What is the relation? What is the relation between Dichten and Denken? You know this phrase, Germany as the land of the Dichter und Denker. Das Land der Dichter und Denker. And thinkers. Yeah. And who was it who then said Land der Dichter und Denker? Dichter und Denker, Dichter und Denker.
I'm not sure who.
Judges and executioners. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. That's also Rilke, yeah? I think, or not? Is it? Death is a master from Germany. So that's what this text is about. So, okay, we'll get to death in a minute. Now, what is this relation between the Dichter and Denken?
For whom? For us?
For us.
For us.
For us. Yeah, well, I mean, for us in dialogue with Heidegger.
Celan, der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland.
Oh yeah, that's Celan, of course, yes.
Und Richter und Henker ist bis somebody called Chagraf, who don't know who it
Ah,
is.
it's a very funny person.
Yeah, that's good.
Kennst du das Land, wo die Kanone blühen?
That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Kästner.
Kästner, yeah. It's not so easy, this question.
Federico. What's your take?
Yeah, Federico is always the
I
one who
think
solves the
you need
problem. Bodi has a suggestion.
No, I think I have
No.
more a question.
Yeah.
But I think probably I'm not the only one that have the question. So this question is basically the question that I have when I read the sentence. So is that what is actually the relationship between of this neighborhood of thinking and making poetry. So for example, I always find it's very difficult when you learn a foreign language. You will, if you practice enough, you will very soon come to the point that you can read in this foreign language. But it is very difficult to really understand poetry in a foreign language. Or for example, if you read the poetry in your mother tongue, your native language, and in a foreign language, the perception is quite different. It's like the things that you understand is different, and also the perception is very different. And in my case, for example, if I read a poem in Chinese, I will all of a sudden I have this emotional contact with it.
Yeah.
I just understand it very precisely. But if this poem is translated into German or Chinese, although I understand it, but I cannot feel I do not feel a connection to it. So there is this something missing. And then this is actually the question that popped into my mind when I read his question and said, okay, is there a relationship between doing poetry and thinking? So this is actually what pops into my mind, because for me, practically and based on my personal experience, there is. But I cannot really explain it in a rational way why there is. It is purely empirical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, and Heidegger says the same thing. What about the neighborhood of poetry and thinking? We stand confused between two wholly different kinds of saying. So, this confusion, I think if we take Heidegger seriously, as long as we're reading him, we might as well try to take him seriously for a little bit. This confusion that you are signaling, he says that has something to do with it. That's not just, oh, I don't understand it yet, or it's more than, oh, I need to study more. This confusion is somehow part of what is being, what this is driving at. So I would like to say we need to stick with that confusion for a bit to find out what it has to say to us. Because he also says, 2 paragraphs further down, we must discard the view that the neighborhood of poetry and thinking is nothing more than a garrulous, cloudy mixture of two kinds of saying in which each makes clumsy borrowings from the other. So sometimes, as Wittgenstein said somewhere, a philosophy book should really be poetry. You should only write poetry about it. Or he also says somewhere else that you could write a philosophy book that existed entirely of jokes. I think that's very true. But to say that you borrow sometimes like a poem or a poetic way of speaking in order to make a point in philosophy, he seems to be saying that's not what I'm about. That's not what I want to say. But there is a confusion, and so we have to ask ourselves what this confusion is. In German, the word is wir finden uns ratlos zwischen zwei durchaus verschiedene Weisen des Sagen. Ratlos is even stronger than confused. We are there's no way out. We wouldn't know where to look to end this confusion.
I also wanted to ask how they are different, because I think in elsewhere Heidegger also writes that thinking is like poetry. So I guess maybe that's because for Heidegger poetry is also like something produces or bringing something worth, and thinking is also when we think we produce something in the world. So that's why I thought my understanding was. That's why Heidegger says that thinking is like poetry. But here Heidegger more emphasizes on the difference, I guess. But he says that there's not the different. They are not different in the way they are separated, but they are different in different ways. So,
Yes, exactly.
So I was wondering what it really means.
Yeah, we're trying to find it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think it might mean?
I don't know. Do you think thinking is bigger? What?
Yeah, but bigger. Yeah. You could say thinking is bigger. Yeah, thinking encompasses very much more than poetry. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. You might think. So that's a place to start. You might think, thinking covers all sorts of things. Like literary language, there's a clear difference. Maybe there's a difference between. But he said, very on book, he said there's no difference between prose and poetry. You might initially say, well, poetry is something else than prose, for example. Maybe that is a starting point.
But it seems very strange to me, but that's because I'm not a philosopher, that Heidegger is all about destabilizing meaning here, or sort of, common uses of words like dichten and denken. And now we're trying to re-stabilize it. It just seems an odd undertaking. Good, but...
Yes, that's true. He stabilizes and then he tries to... yeah, maybe that is right, yeah. I think one of the problems of Heidegger is that he does try to, like I said in the beginning, he tries to... it's his way or the highway. Yeah, literally.
The fictional highway with the
The highway.
very high.
There's something about it that's also, I think, gives it a little bit of comical. You can't read it with dry eyes, that there's something about that. But there's also another side, we talked about that last time, that there's something very precise about his use of words. He's so precise, he knows exactly, there's not a word that's not in place in this whole text, which I think is, we try to write a text like this, that is, I think that is something.
In place within his own system.
Within its own system, it is all there, but it's so much that there's no messiness at all. Then that is a kind of celebration of
It's
purity.
this sort of spatial thinking here when he says when he speaks about the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I think it was very interesting to me in terms of whether language and by extension poetry and thinking is a condition. That's what I never understood. Whether it's a process or a condition for Heidegger in this text. Language and whatever he talks about. Because sometimes it reads like language is a process. It's what we do and it does to us, and that's evolving and changing and all that. And then he says, there is the neighborhood of poetry and thinking. Two things that are parallel, and supposedly we are in it, and it's around us. And also there is the street, the provincial, whatever, path.
Yeah.
And I think that's what confuses me always when I'm trying to conceptualize what he means by the experience of language, when he says at this text we're going to understand the experience of language, and I'm trying to understand how it feels. Whether we need to do it ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
But instead of reading after reading keyboards, maybe
there's,
do it, or whether
there's certainly, that's what I said at the beginning of the seminars. We have to see if by reading this text and not contextualizing it too much, we can have an experience of language. That is the, and of course you can say we are having this experience because we are wading through a hugely confused area right now.
Is it a good experience or is it a bad experience?
Well, yeah.
He says quite early on, there's that bit where he says language comes to the fore when you can't find a word for something.
Yeah.
And then he immediately sort of fixes into, and the most in poetry, from poetry sort of is ambivalent about its relationship with the word. But I was thinking there about psychoanalysis,
He needs something.
yeah, no word is innocent, and every forgetting is highly significant. And you can feel like in that moment, even like in analysis or just like in your daily life, when you forget something, the further you pursue it, the deeper into your mind it goes. There's a feeling like language is language that rises up. It's something that sort of, you don't possess or you don't use, you sort of move in.
That's right, yeah. So there can be an attitude in which almost a wrong attitude to language, if we try to get too fixed on, I want to find the right word, then it's not going to happen. You have to allow it to speak to you, or to well up, or however you want to use, whatever language you want to use. Otherwise it's not going to happen. And I think that's very true. I think we also make this experience a lot when we're studying. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and sometimes suddenly you begin to see it. And you can't really organize that, other than be receptive to it.
Yeah, but for what end? I mean, okay, he constantly emphasized that there's this experience with language and we should somehow try to acquire this experience the experience with language, but for what end? So the end could be because we want to understand each other better, or we want to understand language, one specific language better, so that we use the word in the right way. So it just sometimes confusing because he emphasized a lot that there's this experience with language, but then so purpose, because in his whole philosophy, a lot of books, he also emphasized the to what end that this is going. So there is also this, because in clarifying what end this thing stays in relationship with, then probably we can in turn understand this better. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know what you mean by that last statement, but I do get the question, so why are we doing this? Yeah.
This goes back to death.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to say.
Question.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Then ultimately it is so that we can live with our mortality. But we're not there yet, I think. We can't. But the contest, that's exactly what I have in mind. It's because we are mortal. But we'll get to that maybe in a second. Otherwise, we're going to move too fast. So back to you. Yeah. So what is the purpose of your remark in terms of understanding the relation between thinking and?
Well, it was very interesting you said like how we're supposed to relate to this text. We're supposed to absorb some weighty position on language which fundamentally presents us with. This is how you're supposed to do it. Doesn't this already necessarily implicate like kind of an approach ourselves? How are we supposed to approach language? I thought one of the points that I most identified with is that language rises up as something unknown, which has like a demand on us. I don't know how to articulate it, but in the forgetting of a word, and in psychoanalysis more so. I think that particular structure, where suddenly disclosed language is this kind of this field you move in, which you have mastery over until the point you don't, and then that sudden disclosure, you lose mastery over language. You try and regain it. At that point, language becomes something. I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's the experience of language we should be having, but it was one of the first hints he gives in this text of
exactly.
what is language when we experience it, and not really use it or channel it in a particular direction.
Yeah, that's right. So the moment we experience this confusion, we experience, what you're saying is we're experiencing something like we're lost for words. Yeah. And that's not strange, because normally we speak just about the world around us, but now we are trying to speak about speaking.
And isn't it something very similar to the conception of the utilizability or usability? So the one developed in sein, so 209. So when the hammer doesn't work, now I can question, I can ask what the hammer is, but because before it was just unmediated. Is it something similar? So when I cannot use the word and I cannot find the proper word, now something as the experience of language arises.
Yes,
I think it's the same mechanism which is concerned there and here.
Yeah.
And
That's right. I think that's a very good point. Yeah. So, for example, it would be facetious if you said I can't find the word. If I were to say to you, well, then make one up. So that's not the right response. Why don't you make up a word to say what you mean?
Germans do that all the time. The Germans make up words like there's no tomorrow. That's fine, that's great, that's how language evolves. But that's what language is, it takes hold of meaning itself.
Yeah, that's right. So language is creative, language grows and there are new words arise all the time. But if somebody is looking for the right word and they can't find it, then you can't say, well, then make it up.
The German making up meaning is more composed nouns.
Yes.
That they obey certain rules, you know.
Yeah, of course, they're not arranging random noises into new words because they can't find the one, but...
No, it's not as creative, I mean, it's just that you can sort of put nouns together to make new nouns, and in English you just use two words. I just mean that German isn't any more advanced than word creation.
I think it was just a bad joke. I'm not as precise as Heidegger in what I said.
Let's listen to what Heidegger has to say about it himself. So he says, what about page 89 in English? Wie verhält es sich nun mit der Nachbarschaft von Dichten und Denken? What about the neighborhood of poetry and thinking? We stand confused between two wholly different kinds of saying. And then he says, so it's in ons raadloos. Radeloos verloren. Im Lied des Dichters scheint das Wort als das geheimnisvolle Erstaunende. In the poet's song, the word appears as the mysterious wonder. Die denkende Besinnung auf die Beziehung zwischen dem Ist und dem undinglichen Wort gelangt vor etwas Denkwürdiges, dessen Züge sich ins Unbestimmte verlieren. So that's the other side. Our thinking reflection of the relation between the is and the word that is no thing is faced with something memorable, denkwürdig, whose features fade into indefiniteness. Dort das Erstaunende in einem erfüllten singenden Sagen, hier das Denkwürdige in einem kaum bestimmbaren, jedenfalls nicht singenden Sagen. Right? In the song, wonder appears in a fulfilled singing saying. In our song is the poem. In our reflection, something memorable or thought-worthy, maybe, appears in a scarcely definable, but certainly not a singing saying. Und dies soll eine Nachbarschaft sein, der gemäß Dichten und Denken in einer Nähe wohnen. Beide laufen doch so weit als nur möglich auseinander. How can this have anything to do with each other? Poetry sings of a mysterious wonder in being, in which the language lights up what is, and that is a fulfilled singing. So that's why the poet is a singer. That's language that works, as it were. But then when we reflect about the relation between is and the word that is no thing, between language and reality, or you want to put that, then we're confronted with something memorable. We, for example, in Heidegger's phrase, we understand what unconcealment is, or we understand aletheia as truth. But it loses itself into indefiniteness. So it seems to me that the step that he takes here, in terms of understanding the relation between Dichter and Denken, is to say, well, there is a Nähe, we still don't understand what this nearness is, but now we have the definiteness of poetry, fulfilled definiteness of poetic language, and we have indefinite, never precise, never complete nature of reflective thought. How can this be a neighborhood? It would seem that the two diverge just as far as can be. Okay? And then he says, well, this is what we said earlier, well, we have to oh no, you didn't say that, huh? But we should become familiar with the suggestion that the neighborhood of poetry and thinking is concealed within this farthest divergence of their saying. This divergence is their real face-to-face encounter. Doch wir möchten uns mit der Vermutung befreunden, dass sich die Nachbarschaft von Dichten und Denken in diesem weitesten Auseinander ihres Sagens verbirgt. Dieses Auseinander ist ihr eigentliches Gegeneinander über. Therefore he also says, Dichten und Denken wohnen nebeneinander auf verschiedenste Bergen. Yeah, so they live next to each other but on separate mountains. So you have the abyss between them, as it were. Yeah? But what we experience there is das Auseinander of saying. The neighborhood of poetry and thinking is not the result of a process by which poetry and thinking, no one knows from where, first draw near to each other and thus establish a nearness, a neighborhood. The nearness that draws them near is itself the occurrence of appropriation, the Aquinas, by which poetry and thinking are directed into their proper nature. But if the nearness of poetry and thinking is one of saying, then our thinking arrives at the assumption that the occurrence of appropriation acts as that saying, in which language grants its essential nature to us. So in other words, well, that's not very clear, is it? So, yeah, okay, that's not very clear. There is a nearness that confuses us.
So do they have the same function? If they're parallel, do they fulfill the same purpose? Do they?
I think Heidegger is trying to say that, something like that, but he's trying to say that the fact that we have thinking and that we have Dichten und Denken that are near to each other, which we experience, for example, when we read a poem, or when we think about a poem, as he has done for himself in this text. We experience a nearness, but at the same time they are not the same. We see they are not the same.
So we're confused.
So we're confused because they're not the same. They belong to each other, or they're near to each other, but they're not the same. That opens our eyes, just as when you can't find a word. So I think that is why that is a good analogy. That opens our eyes to nearness itself. Or also dasselbe, to sameness itself. To the near or the same as that which grants the ereignis, the event of appropriation that gives a world into unconcealment, into shining, into being there for us to be said and seen and understood or lived in or to be experienced. So it's almost like a transcendental move. You could almost say, oh, how different is this from neo-Kantianism?
I was about to say, because when he describes this, the relationship between these two, he speaks about the parallel.
Yeah.
And he says these are two parallels, in Greek parallelo, by one another, against one another, transcending in the English translation. I don't know if it's also in the original German. It uses
Übertreffen, yeah.
Which is almost
It's almost the same, it's not exactly the same.
It's not exactly, not literally the same.
No.
But it seems to me that he tries his best to avoid the language of metaphysics, but what he's talking about is precisely a transcendental relation between two things. So,
because he's describing here the conditions of language, the conditions of meaning, the conditions of knowledge, by saying there is this original opening up, and I think that, and I also think that I agree with you, this is a point that metaphysicians have been making over and over again. It's what in medieval metaphysics is called the truth of being, Seinswahrheit, which is the fact that there is a world to know. There is a world to know, whatever I would say about it. And so Heidegger sometimes also calls that the open. And this openness, that is what language, that is in which language itself dwells. It's hard to say it, but this openness, we get a hunch, a hint of that by experiencing the confusion between our confusion when we think about being and thinking and poetry. We think about Dichter and denken, and that's why it is a transcendental. Yeah, I mean, it goes too far to say that because it commits you to a whole set of other things that Heidegger would certainly not want to commit to. But it is very remarkable.
yes, and
you first, and then Bodhi. Yeah.
no, and so it makes me think that in his attempt is not achieving what he wants, at least from this point of view. He cannot grasp this thing, at least not in this passage, I think.
That's right. And also when it gets to death, that comes back again. Yeah, the first few.
So about your comment about the finding the right word. So what I think is how I understand it is and also you said about find the right word. You couldn't find the right word, and you just kind of somehow you have to look at the word's language itself. So for me, how I understand it is basically you try to explain something, you try to say something, but it is exactly in the moment that you see you cannot find the right word among all the vocabulary that you know that there is a meaning that does not have a corresponding word to it. But in this sense, do you mean that in this sense that it is exactly because you cannot find the right word for the meaning that you try to express, so a meaning emerges that has no word to correspond with it, and in this sense it's like that's how you said it's like the word opens itself, so disclose that I don't know, a corner that has never been seen before. But so if I understand you right, I think it's not transcendental in the Kantian sense, because the transcendental of Kantian sense is beyond experience. That is not decided or subjected to experience. But in this sense, it is exactly because of experience that something can emerge. There's something that cannot be known unless you are in the moment, in the point to experience it. So I think in this sense, although it's translated so übertreffen to transcendental, but it's not. I don't think it's a Kantian.
Yeah, I think that is a fair comment. Yeah, I think it more like it sounds Kantian. It's a bit Kantianizing, but you're right in that for Kant, transcendental reflection is never empirical, or it's never so. We can become aware of the fact that we need a transcendental level of reflection in order to make sense of the possibility of experience. But we never experience, for example, das Ding an sich or so. We can just think that it must be there. And that's different here. Yeah? That's right. Yeah.
Can I ask the philosopher something? Is there space within philosophy for feeling?
Yeah.
Because I can't find the word. I agree with you 100%, but the way you're explaining how this is not transcendental in the Kantian sense, I have the word feeling, flashing into my mind. We read something and we find this new conceptual space between language and meaning and all that, and that's what we feel when we see art, when we read the art. So I was just wondering, but it's not new meaning, it's just experience and...
Yeah, but it's one method to acquire meaning. So, when I read the poetry in Chinese, I understand totally different things in Chinese and when it's translated into English. So I think, but the thing with feeling is because I think in idealism, the whole tradition of idealism, especially most representative is Kant, that they try to denounce emotion, denounce experience, empirical as a way to know. They think that it's not a good way to know because it just somehow it's chaotic. There is no room behind it. But then it's actually later, I think, there are, for example, theory of emotion in Marxism, and also other philosophical theory that has connected to psychology, psychoanalysis.
But what I'm wondering is whether Heidegger is feeling, and he's very confused with the fact that he's feeling all the time.
Yeah, I think there is something true about that. So Whitehead, for example, says prose and reality is subtitle could be the critique of pure feeling. So there is an attempt to bring feeling into the philosophical fold. And Heidegger does make very clear, and that is actually a very important point for us, that Gestimmtheit, as he calls it, so mood is often translated, is the way in which philosophy starts. So for him, it's this famous analysis of boredom. Once you are bored, then you can start to experience what time really is. So he's not blind to that, but certainly, of course, that's a good point to make.
But I think also yes, on this point, also the concept of Befindlichkeit. So
Befindlichkeit,
it's crucial for Heidegger because so feeling are like for German idealism dismissed from the realm of knowledge basically, whereas Heidegger seems to me that he tries to make this to bring it back into this real, and so one of the two features of our openness to the world, one is understanding, and the other one is precisely feeling, or how is it translated?
I said Gestimmtheit, but it's Befindlichkeit.
Befindlichkeit, mood. And so it's something essential in Heidegger's thought as well, I think.
Yeah. Is it translated as mood?
I think so, yeah.
But Befindlichkeit has become one of the most ridiculed terms.
In Heidegger?
It has entered common parlance language, and it's become a sort of term that is immensely made fun of by by the left. So
ridiculizing that.
and you can't really translate the word. Yeah, it's definitely not mood.
No, it's not mood.
What,
Yeah,
it's
because
sort
it's
of-
Finland, so
yeah, where you find yourselves in, but in a sort of very
Introspection.
Yeah, but
It's a very woolly word.
yeah.
But it's also it's sort of what Adorno criticizes in the jargon that
The
jargon. It's a jargonesque word from the language of authenticity.
This is also full of emotion. It's hard to describe, but I mean. It just seems that Heidegger thinks he's the only, he has a better class of Befindlichkeit and experience than anybody else, you know. Like Popper is a really modest thinker. I mean, just as profound, but he's not sort of overblown, you know. With Heidegger, he thinks every word he drops is a kind of better word than anybody else will ever say.
And that's why we love him. He's a drummer, he's a queen.
My shit is better than your shit. Yeah. You wanted to say something? Long time ago.
I was just going to ask for clarification. I think I just missed it. But you were saying that something happens when you don't know the word, or you become aware of the nearness and separation. What was that exactly? Like, is that the problem?
Yeah, so what I said was that what can happen is that you experience this openness.
Okay.
That there are things to say, that there are things to know.
Yeah, I was just
So-
wondering how that linked to like the Verbum, der Sprache, or denken, or
Yeah.
relating to.
That I think that is the key point here. So there is an openness before there is language, before there is thought, before you can even say thinking, being. There has to be an openness for there to be something at all, or for there to be world at all, for world to happen. Because it's an Aquinas, so happening or event. And he reads that word Aquinas also very, we won't talk about it, but that is, it's not intelligibility or meaning, but that's why I said it's a Kantianizing moment, it's what's called a condition of possibility for it. And that is what way does. So way, in the sense that it makes a path through a Gegend, then lets that Gegend appear, lets that region appear to us. It's only when there is a way through the field that you can walk and look
Get
at
into the neighborhood.
and look at the field. Get into the neighborhood, yeah. Get into the and so when we experience that there is poetry and thought, and we are confused about how they are related, then in that confusion we experience that they are not the same, as it were, but at the same time that they are near to each other. So we get an experience of what the near is, and when he says it, the near is not what happens to be next to me, but it is a spacing. So he said, he gives the example, people can, so two houses can stand next to each other in the city, or two apartments can have a wall, can share a wall, but people can be complete strangers to each other. Whereas you can have one farmhouse and an hour further down there's the next farmhouse, and they can be best of neighbors. So it's not about physical distance or proximity, it is about something else. It's about dwelling in a shared place. And that is, as it were, what being is, I think. That's how he tries to see it. And so that opens up, that can open up in the moment that we experience the confusion about the relation between philosophy and poetry, I think.
But there is also renunciation. That's the point. I mean, he keeps returning or coming back, even, I don't know what the word is that was used in German, but in English.
Yeah.
It goes back to renunciation
Versagen.
quite a few times.
Yeah, absolutely, that's very important. Can you say some more about what you're thinking of? Das Wort bricht
Yeah.
ab, yeah?
Sorry.
Yeah, the word breaks off.
Yeah. And he's sort of before he says that, there is some evidence that the essential nature of language flatly refuses to express itself in words.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So we can only experience it in the confusion over,
Exactly.
and that is an Ein Sprechen.
And that's part of that pronunciation. So I give up in a certain way, but it's the giving up that then is given.
Exactly. Yeah, and that
gift arrives at that point.
Yeah.
I think.
That's exactly right. Yes. Yes. And so it's a negative. It's almost a negative theology. It's only that because it no longer works that we see where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's different from psychoanalysis, where in psychoanalytic situation, it indicates something you can then get to, whereas here it indicates that there is something that we cannot get to. But that precisely shows itself in the inability to say it. Yeah.
Psychoanalysis still works quite well because there'll be the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. The unconscious is totally inaccessible, but the pre-conscious.
You can say the unconscious remains totally inaccessible, and therefore it's that's right. Yeah, but it's still thought of in terms of presence. There is something there that you can't get to, and that only shows itself in parapraxis and whatever it is.
Isn't that kind of what you do with thinking, like when you're wandering the field or whatever, you are doing something? Wouldn't that be kind of comparable to exploring the unconscious or pre-conscious or something? Similar process. And I think the space still the space it creates the thing and still kind of imagining there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's certainly not a question I can completely answer, but I think Heidegger would certainly not say that his theory of language is like what Freud is talking about. But there are obviously these parallels. That's quite clear. And somebody like Lacan tries to make use of Heidegger in a much more. It's sort of much more radical way in order to talk about the unconscious as a language. That's right. And Lacan would, of course, I think, also probably say something like versagen, or when word breaks off, or when those are, or when we don't know what to say, or then these are moments where sort of this traumatic encounter with the real. So that's always that which cannot be symbolized, which is not cannot be said literally, but can show itself in how I speak. So in that sense, but we have to be. I would say we have to be very careful. We may disagree with Heidegger, but I think he's not talking about psychological structures here. It's not psychologism. It's totally removed from that. It goes exactly in the opposite way.
I just have an example. It's a much modern one. So how the term sexual harassment was found. So basically, there was the time that the women tried to describe that there's this unpleasant interaction with men, but that is not flirt. Although the man would describe it as, come on, just try to give you a compliment, it's a flirt, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But also it's not that violent, like it goes to rape, it's just something in between. And there was, in the first wave of feminism, the women found themselves cannot make themselves intelligible.
Yes.
As if they're talking about something that's only illusion. But then it is with this sexual harassment that this experience can be communicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is a very good example. Yeah. So we Das ist Line von Faust, denn schon gut, nur soll man sich nicht allzu ängstlich quälen, denn eben wo Begriffe fehlen, da stellt ein Wort zur rechten Zeit sich ein. So, if the concept is lacking, a word will position itself sooner or later. And then once you have a word, then it becomes something. Yeah. So that's right, and I think that gives us a hint to what Heidegger is talking about. Of course, Heidegger would then say, yes, there are also things where a word will never be found, and that's and there we need to then.
But words are performative, and the fact is that he was quiet when he shouldn't have been, and that makes this all null and void. So I'm sorry, but there's no two ways about it. I mean, you can make as many words as you like, right. But while he sits in his Philosophenweg, while the Jews are gassed, then you can just shut up as far as I'm concerned. Sorry.
Wouldn't that be
makes
like
me angry.
Universal condemnation? We sit very comfortably while there's massacres in the Congo. Is there any possibility of speech at all, any kind of relationship with a significant being, as long as there's any crime? I think we're going to get really nervous about it. We should take it right to the end and say, there's any suffering anywhere, silence into the Torah.
But Levinas was not that silent, and Heidegger, the atrocities were not in the Congo, they were around the corner.
Yes. Well, I think in terms of a globalised situation, the idea of a corner now is like everything's just around the corner.
But he didn't have a word for it, maybe. You see, maybe he didn't have a word.
Well, he did. He said it was the industrial production of corpses.
There, he had one.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, yeah. Should we just dismiss it? Or should we just say we're not going to read it?
But surely if we say we're going to read it, we're equally culpable. The idea that any of our hands are clean is like an absolute joke.
Yeah.
A total joke. Our entire situation, all our wealth is dependent upon a historical and continuing expropriation of such titanic levels that to pretend there are criminals and non-criminals, I think it's hysterical.
I do agree with you, but it's a different situation.
Of course, it's massively different. If Brexit happens tomorrow and they threaten me immediately as a human physically next to you, so yes, there is always massacre in the world, but then we have a situation when, literally the person next to you is being physically threatened. I think that's the point, not in the general sense of exploitation and human, which is a different level of...
I think, I would agree it's a different level. As a man, like deeply, deeply problematic. To say the store needs to be put down the toilet, I think structurally in the same relationship, you produce the store in a situation of like absolute criminality. Like basically it's been win.
I think intellectually you're completely right. It's just that it's hard to read him out of context. Not that one shouldn't.
Well, if you read the Schwarze Hefte, which were all at the same time, that's it's really very sobering reading. The kind of not just kind of abject views, but also the kitschiness of it, and it's really bad. Yeah.
And also, you're postulating an abstract theory of thinking, but it's very hard to separate the man and the way is performativity, the way he speaks, from what he might say. I'm not saying that, it's just, I mean, every philosopher has also a certain persona. There is no pure language or pure philosophy. I find you can't separate the image the man or sometimes the woman projects from what they say. Does that make any sense?
I agree, yeah. I definitely think there's no point in which you can simply amputate biography, but at the same point, biography cannot really engage seriously, I think, with it can't encapsulate what's written, I think, in the same way like poetry.
I don't mean biography, actually. I mean, there is a performativity in the way they speak. you get a sort of idea of what person. I mean,
That's right.
philosophy asks questions, and they're usually always the same question. Or there's a there is a basic set of questions. No, I don't really like that.
No, you're right. It's always the same question, just posed in different ways. So there's this saying, say the security guy is actually the true philosopher because they always ask you, who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you going?
Basically, you reinvent how to ask questions because you can't separate language from the questions you
But that's
ask.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's important.
And he
to
asks them
reinvent questions.
in an
Yes.
inhumane way.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to say like Heidegger's, sorry.
Sorry, no, go.
If you're going to say Heidegger's like structurally fascistic, it's like that's what it does. I think you have to weigh it in and say like, how is he structurally fascistic? Because if you're going to say look, he's problematic as a person, therefore everything he produces is problematic, I think we're all screwed in that relationship.
Well, that's a clear argument ad hominem.
I'm not.
If somebody was,
I agree. You can just say that hominem. If you can say it's performative, that's ad hominem taken as legitimate. I think that performative doesn't escape biography. If you're going to say that's like legitimate, then you have to. I think you have to invent or demonstrate a way in which his personality was his behaviour.
Well, I think that this pure philosophy of what language is within this environment of oppression, intellectual and physical threat, I think that is exactly informed what you mean, but that this is a performative text and this is a person who performs purism at the time where he needs to be political, which is a fair point. It's a fair point, and structurally this is where, you know.
And we also said in the beginning already, so, this is, you could read this as very authoritarian, because he literally says, don't speak until you're spoken to, by language, but don't get any ideas about, and everything that has to do with the subject expressing themselves or saying what they experience, voicing themselves, that is seen as metaphysical or as scientific, or that's domineering, and so and he uses the word gehorsam, obedient, as a way to indicate our relation to language. And if you then say also that language always comes from the past, and that it is it's tradition in the literal sense, which then in Gadamer becomes such an important notion, but it's already there inside. Then you could then start to build an argument to say, well, this is a kind of ideology of fascism.
I think there are also other ways of repeating or contextualizing Heidegger. I think that we wouldn't have had people like Levinas and others without
That's quite
Heidegger.
clear, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, when he puts, especially at the end of his life, the end of philosophy and the task of thinking is thinking himself, but is telling also others that most of his thinking perhaps has failed from that point of view. He doesn't admit it.
No.
Perhaps he was too proud about it, but I think he's saying there is something that is going wrong here, and I'm unable to address it. And that's why people like Gadamer, Derrida, Levinas, Ricoeur, all of them, I think that were there because of what he said and the way he said it.
Yeah.
It was a reply to his position in a sense.
That's right.
Even provoked them. Levinas wouldn't, being towards death, your death, but not the death of the other. And that's the perfect reply that the face-to-face is here. It repeats, continues, the neighborhood. At a certain point it was also about the guests, etc. Language, I mean, if reading on Ricoeur on translation and the way of welcoming, again, looking at how we read poetry in my own language and how I welcome the language of the other in their translation, etc. And again, it becomes another way of understanding this renunciation of language, the way I've understood it, at least, that it puts me in a very difficult position to impose my own language on the other.
Yeah.
And how I am able or not to welcome the other in my own language. Well, I've been myself in a position of being foreign, with having to deal with other people's language, not my language. Even in my own land, Italian was imposed on me.
Yeah.
It was yet another language, which was so that is, I mean, I'm quite resentful of that. I feel like the slave in Greece that wasn't able to speak Greek.
Yeah, exactly.
But he knew about Greek. He was the Greek language, but it wasn't listened to. And that's Plato.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
So languages, for the Furlan is the same thing. I'm afraid. Sorry to bother you, but they have a language as well. Regions of Italy, they have language, but it's not a language, you see. You go to school and another language is imposed on you.
Yeah.
And that's, that can create a little bit of schizophrenia, really.
Yeah.
And you think in your own language, and then you have to deal with many levels on other languages. But that doesn't prevent me from being aggressive also towards Heidegger when need be. I don't know, but all these celebrations, I mean, of the centenary, they have bothered me a great deal because we are celebrating or remembering the heroes, and we are not saying anything about the people, the stupid people who
started this whole thing. I know, I tweeted about it yesterday.
Did you see? That's the question. That's why I said, you see this question. That's the philosopher.
It is full futility.
That's the philosopher asking the question. You see that is important. Look at all the people that they are celebrating are the major seller of arms to the people who are killing themselves now, not 100 years ago. Now they are killing themselves. And they are there putting the thing on the various cenotaphs, etc.
Yes, and then for the heroes who have died.
Yeah, the heroes who died.
People who allowed themselves
They didn't want to die.
to be shot in the name of.
They didn't want to die, the poor people. They were pushed there.
And if they did, they were
Like
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's right.
I mean, in this sense, I was quite glad that Trump didn't go. That was very interesting.
Yeah, that was very
He didn't
interesting.
go
Sorry
obviously
about
because he doesn't value these things, but this is very real.
Yeah.
These people who show up don't value these things equally to Trump. But he
right.
just doesn't care to show it, which is something the Guardian didn't pick up on. I'm very disappointed in the Guardian. I'm going to tweet them.
Thank you for this bringing reality back. And I mean that is an important point because you can read this and have a feeling that all language is drawn away from you, and then it's almost in bad taste to say what you think about something. So there is a disciplinarian tone in this, I think. Yeah, very very much so. But nevertheless, we did not get around to talking about death. Which, maybe that is the message. But Levinas, of course, it would be really interesting. He's written also beautifully about death in Bloch. And because he saw in Bloch a real alternative to Heidegger's Sein, könnte.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's something that has received very little attention. It's very, very
Where's Bloch about death?
Yeah, in many places. Yeah.
Are you looking for a thesis?
Yeah.
I was curious.
Yeah, in Principle of Hope and also in
Principle of Hope,
Maybe.
maybe, yes.
Yeah.
Principle of Hope.
But so for next time, if we can do the chapter, what is it called?
The way to language.
The way to language, which is
the time to
what is it?
What a creature.
Is it
At last.
first.
reading the principle of doctrine.
We're doing there.
Okay, yes, but it's one of the fifth
Amazing.
Okay, I've got
So
that.
which chapter?
I'm halfway through volume 1. Sorry?
The next,
Yeah, maybe we can come back. Yeah, that's
third chapter.
Yeah, I should have done this, I should have done it now. Here we have it. So next time we're doing Der Weg zur Sprache, 227259, which is in the English text is called The Way to Language. But then we start our discussion with the end of this one,
Death.
death.
Yes.
Yeah?
Okay. Fine.
By the end, we're going to experience it. I mean, it has to be a miracle, people.
I did that. I gave this course once, Introduction to Philosophy, and I started by saying, Plato says philosophy is preparation for death.
Yeah.
You will be happy to know that there will be no exams.
Second lecture, you head up for the class gone.